pandemic has given a boost to conspiracy theories like those propagated by Q-Anon, with its claim that Satan-worshipping pedophile elites are running our lives.
Q-Anon movement appears to be gaining a lot of followers. Can you talk about what you think about that and what you have to say to people who are following this movement right now?
Well, I don't know much about the movement other than I understand they like me very much, which I appreciate.
Obviously, you've heard the president talking about stuff, haven't you? Yeah. That QAnon thing. Yeah. Did he disavow it, anybody?
Hi, I'm Cece and welcome to my channel. If you are not yet subscribed and you would like to be, please go ahead and do that down below. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter. All of that will be linked in the description. Anyway, this video is definitely not going to be monetized because I don't want to censor every other word. So if you would like to comment, like, share, I would love you for that. So today I want to talk about QAnon. QAnon is a far-right conspiracy theory. Basically, the central belief of QAnon is that there is a secret cabal of satanic, cannibalistic pedophiles who occupy high positions in the media, entertainment, and government, and that they are running a global child sex trafficking ring and harvesting and performing rituals with the blood of children. They also believe that Donald Trump is the chosen one, essentially, to ultimately uncover and defeat this cabal, and that is why all of the global elites hate him so much. Travis View is a reporter who spent the last few years researching and reporting on QAnon, and he summarizes it like this. There is a worldwide cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who rule the world, essentially, and they control everything. They control politicians and they control the media. They control Hollywood and they cover up their existence, essentially. And they would have continued ruling the world were it not for the election of President Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump in this conspiracy theory knows all about this evil cabal's wrongdoing, but one of the reasons that Donald Trump was elected was to put an end to them. And now we would be ignorant of this behind-the-scenes battle were it not for Q. What Q is basically a poster on 4chan who later moved to 8chan who reveals details about this secret behind-the-scenes battle, and also secrets about what the cabal is doing and the mass upcoming arrest events through these posts. QAnon, as it exists today, first originated in October of 2017 when an anonymous individual identifying themselves only as Q Clearance Patriot made a post to 4chan claiming to be a top-ranking government official and referencing the calm before the storm. This was assumed to be a reference to a weird cryptic Trump quote from earlier that month when at a military dinner he said, "You guys know what this represents? Maybe it's the calm before the storm. Could be the calm before the storm." When reporters pressed him on this and asked what he was talking about, what storm he was referring to, he only said, "You'll find out." Most people just took this as Trump being his weird reality TV host self. But among Q believers, the storm has come to mean this mythical day of reckoning in which the cannibal satanic pedophiles will be arrested and brought to justice. Over the next few years, Q continued to post on 4chan and other message boards, leading cryptic clues and messages that followers came to refer to as breadcrumbs. Q often told followers to trust the plan, which became a QAnon mantra of sorts. By late 2017, QAnon had its own subreddit and was receiving mainstream media attention. Q-related theories were being promoted by right-wing journalists. I'm using that term very loosely here. Right-wing grifters such as Sean Hannity and Alex Jones. Now, the pedophile, cannibal, sex trafficking ring in which everyone from Barack Obama to Chrissy Teigen is implicated is the central myth of QAnon, but there are several other overlapping theories that are crucial to QAnon's mythology, probably the most notable of which is Pizzagate. Pizzagate originated in 2016 when an anonymous Twitter user claimed that the NYPD had uncovered a pedophilia ring being run by the Democratic Party. In late 2016, John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager at the time, had his emails leaked and published on WikiLeaks. Proponents of the Pizzagate theory combed through these emails and alleged that they contained code words for pedophilia and human trafficking. This really quickly spread all over conservative and pro-Trump news sites like the Conservative Daily Post and InfoWars. Several of those sites even reported that the FBI had confirmed Pizzagate claims, which was just unequivocally false. This theory was also picked up and propagated by several prominent white nationalist figures like Brittany Pettibone, who describes herself as one of the leading authorities on Pizzagate. The Pizzagate theory was also linked to Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C., which led to the constant harassment of the owners and employees there. Eventually, in December of 2016, a man from North Carolina walked into the restaurant with an AR-15 rifle and fired several shots. By his own admission, he did this because he read and believed in Pizzagate conspiracies and was attempting to find and rescue child sex slaves he believed were being held at the restaurant. After he found no evidence whatsoever, he ultimately surrendered to police without harming anyone and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Since one of their own took matters into his own hands and did an armed invasion of the supposed headquarters of the satanic pedophile ring and found nothing, did Pizzagate believers take that as a sign that maybe they had been lied to and fallen for a hoax and back off a little bit? Of course they fucking didn't. If anything, they doubled down even harder, and Pizzagate eventually merged with QAnon. Over the next few years, Q continued posting regularly, typically a few times a day, and the theory gained more and more of a following. QAnon influencers arose on various social media platforms. Donald Trump himself was careful to never directly endorse QAnon, but he would frequently retweet and amplify Q-related hints and talking points. We also started to see a lot of overlap between people who believe in QAnon and people who believe in other dangerous conspiracy theories like the deep state, anti-vaxxing, that various incidents of mass shootings were staged. So going deeper into the origins of QAnon, I could not talk about this conspiracy without talking about how deeply anti-Semitic it is. Gregory Stanton, who is a former professor at George Mason University and an expert in genocide and genocide prevention, published an article in 2020 titled "QAnon is a Nazi Cult Rebranded." I really recommend reading it. I will link it in the description. To understand how and why QAnon is anti-Semitic, we have to take a look at an old anti-Semitic myth called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Elders of Zion was created in Russia around 1902 by anti-Jewish propagandists. It falsely alleged that there was a secret society of Jewish elites who had an evil plot to take over the world. It also made use of the concept of blood libel. Blood libel is a very old, like Middle Ages old, anti-Semitic myth that falsely accuses Jews of kidnapping and murdering Christian children in order to use their blood in religious rituals. This myth of the Elders of Zion was used to spread anti-Semitism and to try and justify the hate and violence perpetrated against Jews throughout most of the 20th century. The Elders of Zion was taught to school children in Nazi Germany and was also distributed throughout the US in the 1920s thanks to Henry Ford. Things they don't teach you in US public school but really should. So all of this should sound very familiar by now. QAnon literally just took these exact same concepts, secret society of powerful elites, kidnapping and harvesting the blood of children, and made them central parts of its own mythology without explicitly saying that they are talking about Jewish people. Instead, they say things like coastal elites, Hollywood elites. They talk about George Soros and the Rothschild family a lot. And we're supposed to read between the lines into the tropes that Jews run Hollywood and the banks and secretly control the world. Eric Feinberg is the vice president of content moderation at the Coalition for a Safer Web, which is an organization that aims to combat online extremism. When asked about the ways that anti-Semitism presents itself in QAnon, this is what he had to say. He says Q adherents do things like calling out Hollywood, which tends to be Jewish, calling out specific Jewish Congress people as pedophiles. Also, it tends to be that Jewish people align more with Democrats. They use that against us to basically say that Jews are pedophiles. Now, if you know a little bit about the history of anti-Semitism and these age-old tropes, this is not subtle, but if you don't, you really might not pick up on it right away. It's really important to be able to recognize these dog whistles in the roots of this mythology and the more subtle ways that anti-Semitic ideas and racist and bigoted ideas in general spread and present themselves. Natalie Wynn talked about this really beautifully in her most recent video, how bigotry is more often than not people outright saying, I hate insert marginalized group.
Bigotry always has a history, and in order to understand bigotry, you have to learn that history. Prejudices are made up of tropes, stereotypes, narratives, arguments. which we aren't born knowing. We have to learn them. No one is born thinking that the gays are destroying the family, or that women are naturally subservient, or that the Jews are trying to control the world economy. So if you aren't familiar with these prejudices, you might not notice anything wrong with them. But if you're aware, woke, if you will, then it kind of rings alarm bells when you hear someone repeating bigoted talking points.
Another point she makes in this video that I think is relevant here is that bigots nowadays more often than not position themselves as being on the defensive and on this moral high ground. I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just concerned about the children who are being sex trafficked by these evil Jewish pedophiles who want to take over the world. I think this anti-Semitic angle to QAnon is important to understand for a few reasons. First and foremost, because George Stanton points out in his article that ideologies like this are literally an early warning sign for genocide. He says, "I have studied and worked to prevent genocide for 40 years. Genocide Watch and the Alliance Against Genocide, the first international anti-genocide coalition, see such hate-filled conspiracy theories as early warning signs of deadly genocidal violence." This is the same rhetoric that was spreading throughout the US and Europe in the 20s and 30s and preceded the Holocaust. And the fact that we now have people in Congress who believe in this conspiracy is extremely concerning. I also think knowing that this conspiracy is based on other very old and previously disproven conspiracies really discredits it. If someone knows all about the Elders of Zion and how it was nonsense made up to try and justify an anti-Jewish hate movement, and then they stumble upon QAnon talking points on Facebook, they might recognize that and be less likely to get sucked into QAnon. And finally, because anti-Semitism is very often left out of a lot of activism on the left. Leftists talk a lot. The end. Leftists talk a lot. Leftists talk a lot about Islamophobia and anti-Black racism, and for good reason, but anti-Semitism is also very much still alive and well. I know I just said that a lot of the anti-Semitism within QAnon is implicit rather than explicit and is made up of racist tropes and dog whistles, and that's true. It does present itself in all the ways I just talked about, but explicit displays of anti-Semitism on the far right and among QAnon circles very much exist as well. At the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where a bunch of white guys with tiki torches got together to save the West, we heard them literally chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Most recently, at the January 6th attack on the Capitol, an event largely spurred on by QAnon and its related conspiracies, there was this guy wearing a Camp Auschwitz shirt. Explicit displays of anti-Semitism like this have been on the rise over the past 4 to 5 years. 2017 and 2019 were unprecedented years when it came to anti-Semitic hate crimes in the US. In 2019, anti-Semitic hate crimes actually made up the majority, 62% of all religion-based hate crimes in the US. I just don't think it's a coincidence that this dramatic rise in anti-Semitic violence coincided with the rise of QAnon and Pizzagate. So I think it's also important to look at how these conspiracies become so widespread in the first place, because I think a lot of other people hear about this and I'm like, this is fucking crazy. Like, there's no way people actually believe this. But they super do. People believe it so much that they are willing to do things like walk into a pizza shop with a gun in order to liberate children they believe are being held captive, or storm the US Capitol with the intent to arrest and hold hostage government officials. I think if it wasn't already, it's become very apparent in the last few years that conspiracies and disinformation like this have very severe real-life consequences. I also think it's a mistake to generalize all QAnon believers as mentally ill or as just stupid rednecks who get sucked into these crazy conspiracies because they don't know any better. I think there are myriad reasons, psychological and systemic, why people fall for these conspiracies. First is that fear and uncertainty are huge factors when it comes to how vulnerable people are to conspiracies. Historically, conspiracy theories thrive during times of crisis. This tracks on a national level when we look at QAnon, because America has been having a hard time for pretty much my entire life, but especially the past few years. QAnon also significantly picked up in popularity and started to spread further into the mainstream in 2020 when COVID started. People were out of work, broke, stuck at home alone. The future was not looking too bright. If you look at Google Trends, you can actually see where interest in QAnon and other related search terms picked up significantly between March 1st and March 21st, 2020, just as the first really severe wave of COVID was hitting the US. There have also been studies done that show that people who are more politically right-leaning tend to be more motivated by fear in their beliefs. And this is just my opinion, but I actually think that makes perfect sense as to why conservatives seem to be more likely to develop and subscribe to these kind of conspiracy theories. When you look at the rhetoric of the far right, the rhetoric that Donald Trump ran on and built a base on, it is very fear-based. Mexicans are coming to rape your wives and take your jobs. Antifa's gonna burn your cities down. We have to fight for American values. It makes sense to me that something like QAnon could come out of that kind of rhetoric, or at least be appealing to people who have that mindset. According to Dr. Karen Douglas, who is a professor of social psychology at the University of Kent, belief in conspiracy theories is often driven by three main sets of psychological motives. First is
epistemic.
First are epistemic motives. That refers to this inherent need that humans have for truth and for clarity. We have a need to know the truth about things and to feel certain about that truth, so we will often seek it out through whatever means we can. Combine that with a large chunk of the population that has a lack of media literacy, particularly a lack of digital media literacy. People might be seeking out truth about certain things and not really know how to verify their sources, or not be using the right sources, and be led down these rabbit holes of conspiracy theories. A lack of digital media literacy is a real problem, especially among older Americans. Studies have shown that older Americans are significantly more likely to share fake news articles on Facebook. And of course, there are younger people who fall for these kind of things too. But I mean, I learned how to use Google in first grade, and every year after that, I learned how to use reliable sources and how to distinguish those sources from some guy's WordPress blog where he can write whatever he wants. And older Americans who got their first computer with internet at age 50 might not have ever developed that skill set. And that doesn't make them stupid, but it does make them vulnerable. The second set of motives are existential motives. This refers to our need to feel safe and secure in the world we live in. Belief in conspiracy theories is often an attempt to satisfy this need because it can give people back a false sense of control over their environment. It can sometimes make people feel better to believe that there is something concrete that they can fight back against, and it can be scarier to accept that sometimes bad things just happen in the world and there's not a lot you can do about it. The third set of motives that Dr. Douglas talks about are social motives. There's very often this attitude among conspiracy theorists that they are enlightened and that they know things that other people don't, and that everyone else is a sheep. And so belief in conspiracy theories can make people feel special in that way. So those are some psychological reasons as to why people are drawn to conspiracy theories. When we're looking at how these theories spread, we can't entirely blame social media because conspiracy theories existed before social media, but it certainly hasn't helped matters. Social media has turned out to be a really effective radicalization tool for a couple reasons. First, just the sheer accessibility of it. Social media has made it easier than ever before for people who have these fringe beliefs to find others who have these beliefs. It's also easier for them to recruit and to find others who may not yet have these beliefs, but may be vulnerable to being radicalized for whatever reason. A few years ago, as Facebook was dying out, I mean, it's dead at this point, but as kind of a last-ditch effort to save itself, Facebook was pushing its groups feature really hard, trying to get people to use Facebook to connect with others who have similar interests to them. This is actually believed to be a pretty significant factor in pushing QAnon further into the mainstream. At one point, the top 10 QAnon groups on Facebook collectively had over 1 million members. So you combine these psychological reasons as to why people are drawn to conspiracy theories with the accessibility of conspiracy theory talking points and conspiracy-related information, and you can see how QAnon has become so widespread. As of January 2021, QAnon, most social media sites have finally cracked down on disinformation, most notably disinformation related to Q and other conspiracies. However, this is really just too little too late. I do have mixed feelings about social media censorship as a whole. No, it is not a violation of your First Amendment rights, but I do think it can have some unintended consequences. On the one hand, it's irresponsible to just allow dangerous disinformation to spread on your platform. And I do think deplatforming high-profile people like Donald Trump, who just constantly spread dangerous disinformation, is a good thing. But at the same time, if you kick the people who believe in this stuff off of your platform, they will likely just create their own platforms and migrate over there and form an even more insular community surrounded only by people who share their existing beliefs. All that being said, I do think we've arrived at kind of a worst case scenario here. If mainstream tech and social media companies had cracked down on this disinformation years ago when it first started, I think that QAnon and Pizzagate might not have spread so much into the mainstream. I think those conspiracies may have stayed somewhat fringe. But now we've arrived at this point where these conspiracies have been allowed to spread basically unchecked all over every mainstream social media site for years. And I think that platforms banning Q-related info at this point basically just reinforces their beliefs. It reinforces their sense of persecution and their conspiratorial thinking. A lot of Q believers see the censorship of Q-related posts as evidence that there really is a deep state and that the big tech CEOs are in on it and they don't want us to be able to post and share information about it. And now they're likely just going to migrate over to Parler or Gab or Telegram or whatever other free speech platforms inevitably pop up. So what is next for QAnon now that Donald Trump is no longer president and he did not win a second term or arrest Hillary Clinton or take down the evil cabal or any of the things that Q promised? Well, we now have QAnon believers like Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress. So unfortunately, it looks like this is not just going to quietly go away anytime soon. But the whole movement is spiraling and fracturing a little bit at the moment. And to understand why, we have to look at the last 6 months or so from a Q believer's perspective. QAnon believers had been told with certainty that Donald Trump would win re-election in a landslide. That obviously did not happen. After the election, Trump lost, stopped posting, went almost completely silent. That led people within the movement to start looking to these QAnon influencers I mentioned earlier, who began to point people to January 6th, when Congress was supposed to certify the election results, as a significant date. Donald Trump very much egged this on, along with some legislators and right-wing political pundits. And this, of course, led to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. When that ultimately failed, Q believers started to look to January 20th, Inauguration Day, as the next significant date. A lot of Q believers started to see Inauguration Day as the day of the storm, this final day of reckoning when the cabal would be brought to justice. Trump would declare martial law or invoke the Insurrection Act and be inaugurated for another term. Joe Biden would be arrested on stage and forced to admit that the election was fraudulent. They were seeing signs in things like the fact that Trump gave his farewell speech in front of 17 flags. Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet, so that obviously meant something. Obviously, none of that happened. Joe Biden has been inaugurated. Trump did not miraculously seize back power at the last second. And now the movement is fracturing somewhat and spawning all kinds of additional theories. So there are a significant number of Q believers who are extremely disillusioned and are considering the possibility that they were lied to and fell for a hoax. Still more are considering that Biden may actually be part of the plan to take down the cabal and that him taking office was part of the plan all along. And still more are advising their fellow Q believers to wait for the storm at a later date. A new theory spawned that seems to be gaining some traction is actually a merging of QAnon with the sovereign citizens movement. Sovereign citizens is a conspiracy theory that alleges that the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871 actually nullified the original Constitution and established the US as a corporation rather than a country. This new Q theory is based on that and the fact that in 1933, Inauguration Day was changed from March 4th to January 20th. Some Q believers now think that since Inauguration Day was changed after 1871, 2021 that Joe Biden's January 20th inauguration was illegitimate and that Donald Trump will be inaugurated on March 4th as the legitimate president. It's a little hard to understand because it doesn't actually make any sense, but that's where we're at. In this resulting chaos, a number of extremist groups have advised their followers to capitalize on the disillusionment of Q believers in order to recruit. So that's super fucking great. The thing about conspiracy theories like this is that they tend to take actual events or things that were grounded in fact and use all kinds of faulty logic to try and twist them into evidence for these very unhinged conspiracy theories that are just no longer grounded in reality. Travis View says, the interesting thing about QAnon is that there's always at least this tiny hint of truth to it. I've talked about sometimes they're sort of right, maybe in a very broad general sense, but their specific particular claims are always insane and far, far detached from reality. In the case of secret pedophile rings, I mean, you don't have to look very far to see that that kind of thing actually happens. I'm talking about the massive scandal in the Catholic Church. For example, there's a case in Philadelphia, which was horrendous, of many people who were molested by people in the Catholic Church. And it was sort of covered up and has gone on and served several cities all over the world. Very, very tragic. And of course, there's the case of Jeffrey Epstein, who was a billionaire and who may have molested dozens of girls and then basically got a sweetheart deal from the government and is a free man now. This article was originally published in August 2019, but I think his general point still stands. I don't want to sound like I'm giving Q proponents even an inch here because I truly think that the majority of their beliefs are so dangerous and harmful and untrue. But I do want to explain how sometimes real events, at least in a conspiracy theorist's mind, become evidence for their theory. Was Jeffrey Epstein a wealthy, powerful man who was also a disgusting child predator and who used his wealth and prestige to get away with that for years? Yes. Is it a wild and illogical extrapolation to use that as some sort of evidence that all of Q's claims are true? Also, yes. So I have a feeling that at this point, some people might say, well, there are things that seem super conspiratorial and unlikely that actually demonstrably happened. Things like Watergate, the Iran-Contra affair, the sex abuse scandal within the Catholic Church. How do we sort out those real events that seem super conspiratorial and far-fetched but actually happened from conspiracy theories like QAnon that really just have no basis in fact? Stephen Lewandowski, who is a professor of cognitive psychology at the University of Bristol, has actually written about this. He argues that there are a few common faulty thought patterns that point to unreliable conspiratorial thinking, and that we can look for and learn to recognize these in order to determine the likely truth value of a conspiracy. First is that people who believe in conspiracies tend to have an absolutely extreme level of skepticism to the point that they will often reject even well-documented evidence. For example, many people who believe climate change is a hoax outright reject the years of scientific evidence and the opinions of experts who almost unanimously agree that climate change is real and is caused by human activity. Second, conspiracy theorists often believe that nothing happens by chance, and they jump at the opportunity to interpret any random occurrence as evidence that confirms their theory. In the spring of 2020, when coronavirus was spiking across the US, Donald Trump happened to wear a yellow tie to a press conference. Yellow is a signal for the all clear in maritime flags, so some Q believers took this as evidence that Trump was sending them a secret message that everything is okay and that coronavirus isn't real. Third, people invested in a particular conspiracy theory might abandon tenets of that theory when they're disproven, but this will not cause them to abandon the theory as a whole. For example, when a gunman raided a DC pizza shop believing that he would find and liberate child sex slaves who were being held hostage, and he found nothing, that didn't make Pizzagate believers abandon the theory as a whole. It simply made many of them abandon their fixation on that particular pizza shop while maintaining an overall belief in Pizzagate. Finally, Lewandowski describes conspiratorial thinking as self-sealing, meaning that any evidence against the theory is often reinterpreted as evidence for the theory. Lewandowski argues that evaluating conspiratorial thinking based on these tenets can help us to determine the likely truth value of a given conspiracy theory. So I also really didn't want this to be another video that was like, LOL, let's laugh at these crazy rednecks who believe in these stupid things. Mainly because that's not productive. As tempting as it can be, no one ever changed their mind or left an extremist group because someone dunked on them on Twitter and told them how stupid they were for getting sucked into it in the first place. If anything, being ridiculed for their admittedly very ridiculous beliefs will just drive people further into them. There's also a real interpersonal and social cost to these conspiracies and disinformation campaigns, and I think that deserves to be talked about with a degree of compassion and tact. So I posted on YouTube and Instagram asking my subscribers if any of them have loved ones who believe in QAnon or related conspiracies, and if they would be willing to share their experience and what that's been like for them. I've decided to just share all of these responses anonymously because most people ask to be anonymous anyway, but I'm going to read some of the responses I got.
My father believes most of the Q conspiracy theories. He believes that the elites, government officials, and Hollywood celebs were/are running an underground child sex trafficking ring run by the Clintons and others. He was also adamant that even after the election was called, Donald Trump would expose Joe Biden's election fraud and he would remain president for a second term. Even a couple weeks ago, he sent a group text to our family telling us that Trump was going to declare martial law. Just yesterday, I walked in on him listening to a podcast where the host was explaining that the COVID vaccine was the mark of the beast and anyone who takes it will be turned away from the gates of heaven. It honestly just feels good to be able to share it with someone other than my siblings. I don't like telling people usually because I don't want them to look down on him. He's still my dad and I love him, but I just can't even have a rational and calm conversation with him anymore. He's so detached from reality in that way. My cousin, who I consider more of a sister, has always had spiritual New Age beliefs. This was never an issue, and I respect all religious and spiritual beliefs, even though I consider myself to be more driven to science-based and logical thinking. 5 years ago, she started dating a guy who always rubbed me the wrong way. He came across as disingenuous and made it vocal that he was a flat earther, didn't believe in climate change, and danced around the conspiracy theory of the Illuminati. While these beliefs bugged me, I found them more humorous and figured my cousin would see through his ridiculousness. But flash forward to the present. My cousin is very pro-Trump, claiming he has done so much for sex trafficking, the media is full of lies, and other Q-related hints. I confronted her, and she says that she isn't a full Q follower, but agrees with some of the things they say. She has since become anti-vax as well, and believes in every conspiracy I've heard of, including fake school shootings, chemtrails, New World Order, and so on. She still wants to have a relationship with me, but sadly I am the one finding it difficult. I'm trying to work past our differences, but it's incredibly hard knowing her worldview. I have done a lot of research into why people fall for conspiracies and cults, and have read up on individuals with extreme anxiety disorders using these false beliefs as a way of controlling their surrounding environment. This is my cousin to a T, as she has suffered from anxiety and paranoia her entire life. I don't have experience specifically with QAnon people, but strangely enough I can sympathize with them. Not in the way you think, though. I think I grew up in a super cult-like religion with doomsday kind of rhetoric, and breaking away was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I think it's really easy to laugh at these people for believing in something absolutely ridiculous and call them stupid. But many, many cults have incredibly intelligent and educated people. I also know that I used to believe in something that I now think is ridiculous, and I know I wasn't stupid. I do think I was groomed in a way that I couldn't properly discern truth. I know of people in my old faith who are QAnon supporters, and I think the religion groomed them for it. I also don't think that ex-QAnon supporters should be made fun of. Don't mistake this as me sympathizing with their cause. I couldn't be further away from them politically. But I do know what it's like to have your whole worldview come crashing down. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I think if you want people to leave QAnon, you have to give them a way out. The most interesting thing with my father is that he doesn't have access to a computer. Doesn't text, is very low tech. Doesn't have friends, but yet he somehow knows every conspiracy theory in the book. The day of the Capitol riots, I spoke with him, and it was 2 full hours of every conspiracy in the book. The riots are by paid actors, all the way to global warming is a hoax by the Chinese to buy America. I mean, things I thought only deep Reddit folks would know. I haven't spoken to him since. Now that I'm married and have a family of my own, it's really hard for me to be close to my family when I know this is how they are. They will quickly believe any little theory someone says. But my biggest worry is, as I look to start a family, how will I communicate to my child that we love their grandparents, but also don't listen to anything they say? It has made me rethink most of my childhood, because if they think this now, what else was I so misguided on?
So if you are someone who has lost family members or has strained relationships with loved ones due to their belief in conspiracies, first of all, my heart really goes out to you. I'm going to leave some resources in the description about how to deal with this kind of thing emotionally and how to talk to your loved ones and hopefully help them keep one foot in reality. There's the subreddit QAnon Casualties, which is just kind of a place for people to vent and connect with other people who have lost or strained relationships with their loved ones due to QAnon. Dr. Dana Young is a professor at the University of Delaware, and she has dedicated a lot of her career to studying the impact of modern media on sociopolitical discourse. She has some advice on what to do and what not to do if you have loved ones who are deep in QAnon or other conspiracies. Do not mock, do not use snark. All of the Twitter posts where people make fun of the crazy QAnon supporters, all that does is further reinforce their sense that they are disrespected and maligned. Number 2, using scientific evidence, argumentation, etc. that comes through the very institutions that they have been told not to trust. That is going to backfire because now they think that you are the dupe because you trust these institutions. Come at them with unconditional love. As hard as that is, reminding them of the pre-existing bonds that you have. If it's a brother or sister, how about talking about old stories and just texting them and saying, oh my gosh, I remember that fishing trip we had back when we were 5 and you fell in the lake, right? Because now you're asking them to tap into an identity that they haven't tapped into in a while. That is their identity as a brother or a sister. So that is it for today. Thank you for watching. If you are still watching, I know that this was a longer one, but I really hope that some of you found this interesting or helpful. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and I will catch you guys in the next one.